This section examines the different registration routes available to manufacturers in Mexico. Before you start selling your products in Mexico, you must register it following one of a few registration routes, each with its own nuances, advantages, and disadvantages. Let's take a closer look. There are 4 review routes available in Mexico, which are the standard review, third-party review, equivalency review, and low-risk route. Each route requires its own level of preparation, including legal documentation, product information, and reading materials such as instructions for use, labeling, etc. The standard review route has existed the longest of the 4. It requires companies to compile their technical data in the form of a registration dossier. Information in the dossier includes full product technical information, any applicable testing results, labeling, instructions for use, and a copy of your ISO 13485 Quality Management System certificate or equivalent. These materials must be submitted in Spanish to COFEPRIS for review. Typically, for higher risk devices, clinical data is required. However, this can also apply to lower risk devices. Clinical data should be included in your dossier with your registration submission, and depending on the product, may be scientific articles, the results of a clinical investigation, or both. Trials conducted outside of Mexico are accepted. Review times can be considerably long following the standard route. This is because of the high number of submissions and limited number of resources available to review them. Be sure to have all of the information required, as any additional requests from COFEPRIS after submission will only add to your time to market. The second registration route in Mexico is technically the same as the first route, except instead of COFEPRIS handling the review, a third-party reviewer is hired. As noted earlier, the review times for the standard route can be prohibitively long. Using a third-party reviewer will add some cost to the registration, but your time to market could be as much as halved. Third-party reviewers are notorious for being very critical of submissions. It is highly important to make sure you submit all requisite information and documentation to avoid delays. The third registration route is referred to as the equivalency review. If your device is already registered with the US FDA, Health Canada, or Japan's PMDA, it may qualify for an equivalency review process with COFEPRIS. The equivalency route does not require additional costs for a third party to review the application, and in some instances may be faster than submitting through the standard process. However, when leveraging existing US or Canada approval, it can take nearly as long as registering with COFEPRIS under the standard process. Also, a full summary dossier would be required when referencing US or Canada approval. In addition, your summary dossier must include the following: any associated certificates, device labeling, technical documentation, certificate to foreign government, and proof of quality management system compliance. Of the 3 equivalency markets, the US is the most difficult, especially if you lack any of the required documentation. Your registration application must include your certificate to foreign government and a history of all adverse events for the device. You are also required to include your establishment inspection report. This can prove to be difficult if the FDA either has not performed that inspection or neglected to give you the report. You can use this route for Class 1, 2, or 3 devices. Companies entering into Mexico's market using the Canadian equivalency review route do not have to provide a copy of their audit reports or history of any adverse events, making this comparatively easier than the US equivalency route. They do, however, have to include a copy of their medical device license, Canadian ISO 13485 certificate, and their registrar's credentials. This route can be used for Class 2, 3, and 4 devices. Mexico also views Japan's medical device registration process equivalent to their own. This by far is the easiest of the equivalency routes, provided you're already marketing in Japan. Following this route, you'll need to provide a certificate of free sale, certificate of export, and proof of your pre-market certification or pre-market approval. You can use this route for Class 2, 3, and 4 devices. Low-risk devices do require registration, but there's no need to provide technical data. Your Mexican registration holder simply submits your application to COFEPRIS with basic company and device information, including a draft COFEPRIS compliant label. You cannot use a third-party reviewer for low-risk device submissions. This really isn't a problem though, because low-risk device registrations typically take even less time, with approvals taking between 1 and 2 months. Examples of low-risk devices include dressings, bandages, cervical collars, and face masks. Once approved, COFEPRIS issues your certificate, and confirmation of your completed registration is posted on the Ministry of Health's website. You may then begin selling your product. Your registration is valid for 5 years. In our next module, we'll discuss some of the post-market obligations.